Okay, today we are going to talk about the impact of the influenza here in the US and how this affects everyone on a yearly basis. Each influenza season has more than unusual um, suffering count from the flu. Hospitals and clinics are looking for additional staff to properly treat these patients each year, and we're trying to determine how many staff to send, where to, and when. And as you can see, the numbers are constantly going up each year. And if we are trying to predict for next year, my personal prediction is that it's going to drop for the 2018. So we're going to go and continue on. The larger the population, the more influenza deaths. That is my hypothesis. And according to the data when I was looking at it, that was accurate. We can see, of course, California. We're going to go to New York and Florida as well. Those are some of our higher populated states, and they have the highest death counts. And so my hypothesis was proven to be quite accurate. The larger the state, especially percentage of deaths, versus the smaller states, had those smaller deaths. Because even looking at the smaller states, Mississippi, we're going to go to Nebraska, the Carolinas, the North Dakotas. The Carolinas weren't too bad. North Dakotas were very small. We can look at Alaska. Alaska had nothing to report. Then you also go to Hawaii. I mean, we'll take a look here at Wyoming, Montana. Those are smaller populace, but they didn't have as many death counts. So it's proven here that with larger populations, they have higher percentage of deaths. So that proved to be true. And we're going to go to my next tab. That if the average age of the population is older than, say, we'll say about 24 right here, there's nothing there. But for my hypothesis, if it was over 44, then there would be a higher percentage of the influenza deaths. And according to here, 0 to 24 years had no significant number of deaths. And then from there on out, they grew exponentially. Each age group, the older that you get, has a higher risk of death. Then even looking here at the age groups in each state, of course the higher populated ones, again on the previous slide, they have higher death counts. And it still shows 85 years old is the majority of each state, no matter how much smaller the population is of that state. So that proved to be true and correct as well. Now we're going to go back to one of my other boards. But on this one I did. Okay. There we go. My hypothesis when I was looking at the data for 2009 to 2017 is if the peak of the influenza season begins in autumn, that is usually around the time frame of about the 8th month of the year. Sometimes it's the 9th month of the year. So autumn. We'll say autumn. Then more deaths will occur during September to November. This wasn't accurate at all. But we did notice that this is not a peak. The peak is once we start getting to the winter months, and especially around December. So for the holidays and for the winter season, that is the highest death count. My opinion, of course, would be to send that medical staff at that time. And that's when those numbers would start to increase. So each line was showing those higher states. Of course, California, New York, Texas. And then looking down here, the influenza deaths will increase as the winter progresses. So that was to prove my point real quick. I found it quite interesting. California had 2 times more deaths than Texas. And then the numbers just start drastically dropping. However, this is still paying attention to each month of the year. And I find that quite fascinating. So now we'll go back to my board and we are going to conclude. In my personal opinion, I would start to send the medical staff the early part of winter, if not the tail end of autumn, which means about September, November. And the reason why is because then that starts to taper down those deaths before they become deaths. They're just the influenzas. And this is where they all break out of. Again, the higher populous ones, California, New York, Florida, Texas, Idaho, Michigan. It might be the higher the location within the U.S., maybe the colder months. But it's still too high of a death count. We are trying to drop this and decrease the deaths. So what we want to do is we want to start educating people, maybe looking for feedback as they're being checked out, maybe getting their vaccination. And then that way these numbers, especially in these higher populated states, can start dropping. And I think that'd probably be the best route to go. And there's still other options. But I think the early treatment, feedback, surveys, and how to educate people to remind them about the vaccine and what it does for them in the long run, and to especially focus on those older age groups, especially over 44 years and older, that could definitely save lives and drop the population. So that is my presentation. I'm curious to see what you guys think, and I hope you've learned something.